In the depths of Richmond Palace, on a cold March morning in 1603, courtiers discovered something that would chill them to the bone. Among the personal belongings of England's most powerful monarch lay a letter, a document so disturbing that its contents were immediately sealed away from public view. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen who had ruled England for 45 years, had died under circumstances far more sinister than history textbooks dare to reveal. What they found in that letter suggested that her death was not the peaceful passing of an aging monarch, but the culmination of decades of slow, deliberate poisoning, possibly by her own hand. The woman who defeated the Spanish Armada, transformed England into a maritime power, and gave her name to an entire age had spent her final years as a prisoner of her own vanity. The very makeup she used to maintain her legendary beauty may have been the instrument of her destruction. But the truth behind Elizabeth's death runs deeper than cosmetic poisoning. It reaches into the darkest corners of Tudor politics, where survival meant deception, and even queens were not safe from those who claimed to serve them. This is not the story of Gloriana you learned in school. This is the account of a woman trapped between the impossible demands of power and femininity, whose desperate attempts to preserve her image may have cost her everything. The evidence suggests that Elizabeth I did not simply die. She was slowly murdered, possibly by her own choices, in one of history's most prolonged and tragic endings. Welcome to Empress Secrets, where we uncover the hidden truths of history's most powerful women. If you're captivated by stories of strength, sacrifice, and secrets, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to Empress Secrets for more untold tales that will inspire you to embrace your own power. Let's dive into the haunting story of Queen Elizabeth I and the deadly cost of her beauty. Elizabeth Tudor's path to the throne was paved with blood from the moment of her conception. Born in 1533 to King Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth entered a world that branded her existence illegitimate. Her father's obsession with securing a male heir had already torn England from the Catholic Church, plunging the nation into religious and political turmoil. When Elizabeth was just 2.5 years old, she witnessed the systematic destruction of her mother, a trauma that would shape her life and, ultimately, her death. Anne Boleyn's execution in 1536 was no mere act of justice. It was a spectacle orchestrated by Henry VIII to erase her from history. Accused of adultery, witchcraft, and treason, Anne was stripped of her title, her marriage declared invalid, and her daughter, Elizabeth, rendered a bastard in the eyes of the court. On May 19, 1536, a French swordsman severed Anne's head with a single stroke at the Tower of London, leaving the young Elizabeth motherless and titleless, forced to navigate a court where survival demanded cunning. The psychological scars of this event ran deep. Elizabeth grew up knowing her father had murdered her mother, that her birth had sparked Anne's downfall, and that her own survival hinged on pleasing a man capable of killing those he once loved. The Tudor court was a viper's nest, where children learned that love was fleeting, power was paramount, and even family ties could turn deadly. Henry's subsequent marriages, to Jane Seymour, who died giving birth to Edward, and of Cleves, whose marriage was annulled, and Catherine Howard, executed for adultery, reinforced these brutal lessons. Each marriage, divorce, and execution taught Elizabeth that survival required vigilance, deception, and control. By the time Henry VIII died in 1547, Elizabeth, then 13, had become a master of self-preservation. Fluent in Latin, Greek, French, and Italian, she wielded her intellect as a weapon. She cultivated an image of Protestant piety while privately questioning all authority. Above all, she learned to read the subtle cues of court politics. A glance, a gesture, a carefully chosen word could mean the difference between life and death. These skills, honed in a childhood soaked in blood, would define her reign but also sow the seeds of her tragic end. Let's take a moment to reflect. Elizabeth's early life shows us that adversity can forge resilience. Like her, you have the power to rise above challenges and shape your own destiny. Keep pushing forward, and don't forget to support Empress Secrets by liking, sharing, and subscribing to join our community of history lovers who uncover the truths behind the legends. In October 1562, at the age of 29, Elizabeth faced a crisis that would mark the beginning of her descent into the vanity that would ultimately kill her. Smallpox, a disease that had already claimed countless lives across Europe, struck the young queen with devastating force. For days, she lay near death in Hampton Court Palace, her body burning with fever, her counselors whispering about succession in the corridors outside her chamber. When she finally emerged, Elizabeth discovered that the disease had left her with something worse than physical scars. It had destroyed her legendary beauty. The smallpox ravaged her face, leaving deep pockmarks across her skin, particularly on her forehead and cheeks. In an age where a monarch's appearance was seen as a reflection of divine favor, this disfigurement was not merely cosmetic, it was a political catastrophe. Elizabeth's beauty had been one of her most powerful diplomatic tools, used to manipulate foreign ambassadors and maintain the fiction that she might marry to secure alliances. European courts had described her as having skin white as snow and a complexion that seemed to glow with inner light. That woman was gone forever. The psychological impact of this transformation was profound. Elizabeth had grown up understanding that her power was tenuous, dependent on balancing desirability with independence. Her beauty had been her armor, her weapon, and her shield. Without it, she felt vulnerable in ways that went beyond the physical. Court observers noted that after her recovery, Elizabeth became obsessed with mirrors, spending hours examining her reflection and experimenting with cosmetic treatments. It was during this period that she first encountered the lead-based cosmetics that would eventually kill her. Venetian ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar, promised to create the pale, smooth complexion that was the height of fashion among European nobility. Expensive, exclusive, and devastatingly effective at covering imperfections, ceruse could mask the pockmarks left by smallpox, restoring an artificial smoothness that resembled her former beauty. Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting described the elaborate ritual that surrounded her daily makeup application. Each morning, she would sit for hours as layers of ceruse were carefully applied to her face, neck, and hands. The process was painstaking, requiring multiple coats to achieve the desired opacity. Over this base, additional cosmetics were applied: kohl around the eyes, rouge made from mercury sulfide on the lips and cheeks, and delicate painted details to emphasize her features. The immediate results were spectacular. Foreign ambassadors once again praised Elizabeth's appearance, noting her alabaster skin and ethereal beauty. Marriage negotiations resumed with renewed vigor as European princes competed for the hand of the Virgin Queen. Elizabeth had used chemistry to restore her political power, but she had also begun a process that would slowly poison her body over 4 decades. The tragedy of Elizabeth's transformation was that it worked too well. The lead-based cosmetics not only covered her scars, but created an image of otherworldly perfection that became central to her royal identity. She could not abandon the makeup without revealing the damaged skin beneath, nor could she continue using it without subjecting herself to daily doses of toxic metal. She had chosen beauty over health, political power over physical well-being, setting herself on a path toward a slow, agonizing death. What began as a cosmetic solution evolved into a daily ritual of self-poisoning that would continue for 40 years. Let's pause to consider Elizabeth's strength and vulnerability. She faced impossible choices, yet she persevered to maintain her power. You, too, can overcome obstacles by embracing your inner resilience. Show your support for Empress Secrets by hitting that like button, sharing this video, and subscribing to uncover more stories of extraordinary women who shaped history. Elizabeth's makeup routine, which courtiers described as lasting up to 4 hours each morning, involved the systematic application of substances that modern science recognizes as among the most dangerous known to humanity. The Venetian ceruse contained lead concentrations that would horrify contemporary toxicologists, while additional cosmetics introduced mercury, arsenic, and other deadly compounds into her system. The lead in ceruse was particularly insidious, absorbing directly through the skin and accumulating in the body's tissues over time. Unlike acute poisoning, which produces immediate symptoms, chronic lead exposure causes a slow degradation of mental and physical function that can take decades to manifest. Elizabeth's daily application of thick layers of lead-based makeup meant she was receiving doses far exceeding what would be considered safe even for industrial workers today. Contemporary accounts described her makeup as so thick it resembled a mask more than traditional cosmetics. Visitors to court noted that Elizabeth's face appeared carved from marble, with an unnatural smoothness that glowed in candlelight. This effect was achieved through multiple layers of ceruse, each building upon the last to create a porcelain-like surface. This mask-like appearance became so associated with Elizabeth that many subjects never saw her natural face. The psychological dependence on this cosmetic routine was as dangerous as the physical poisoning. Elizabeth became convinced that her power and legitimacy depended on maintaining this artificial appearance. She forbade realistic portraits in her later years, insisting that all images show her with the smooth, ageless face created by her makeup. The famous Mask of Youth portraits were not artistic conventions, but deliberate propaganda to conceal her deteriorating condition. The application process grew increasingly elaborate as Elizabeth aged and the effects of lead poisoning became more apparent. Her ladies-in-waiting reported that she required ever thicker applications of ceruse to achieve the desired effect as her natural skin became more damaged and discolored. What had once been a few layers of makeup became a construction project, with cosmetics applied so thickly they would crack and flake throughout the day, requiring constant touch-ups. The economic cost was staggering. Elizabeth spent the equivalent of millions of dollars in modern currency on her makeup supplies, importing the finest ceruse from Venice and exotic pigments from across the known world. Her cosmetic expenses represented a significant portion of the royal budget, reflecting the importance she placed on her appearance and the increasing quantities of makeup needed to maintain the illusion of youth. Most tragically, Elizabeth seemed to understand the dangers of her cosmetic routine but felt powerless to abandon it. Advisors like William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, urged her to reduce her makeup use, especially as reports circulated about other noblewomen dying from cosmetic poisoning. Elizabeth's response was always the same. She could not appear before her subjects or foreign dignitaries without her face. The artificial appearance had become so central to her identity as queen that removing it felt like abdicating the throne itself. As Elizabeth's dependence on lead-based cosmetics deepened, the royal court transformed into a theater of deception, where reality became indistinguishable from performance. She installed specially designed mirrors throughout her palaces, Venetian-crafted surfaces subtly curved or tinted to present a more flattering reflection. These mirrors, created at enormous expense, allowed Elizabeth to maintain the illusion that her cosmetic transformation was successful, even as her natural appearance deteriorated beneath the poisonous mask. The psychological effects of chronic lead poisoning began to manifest in the 1580s, though courtiers attributed her erratic behavior to the stresses of ruling. Lead poisoning causes irritability, memory loss, difficulty concentrating, and confusion, all symptoms that became increasingly apparent in the aging queen. Her famous temper tantrums, once calculated displays of authority, became unpredictable rages that terrified even her most trusted advisors. The daily ritual of applying makeup became a form of torture. The lead-based ceruse burned her skin, causing redness and irritation that required even more makeup to conceal. The weight of the thick cosmetics caused headaches and made facial expressions difficult. Elizabeth's radiant smile became a rigid grimace maintained by sheer will. Her attempts to preserve her youthful appearance grew desperate, even grotesque. She experimented with bizarre treatments, like applying raw meat to her face as an anti-aging remedy and using mercury-based compounds to restore her complexion. These treatments, recommended by court physicians ignorant of their chemical dangers, only added to the toxic burden her body carried. Foreign ambassadors began reporting disturbing observations. The Venetian ambassador noted that Elizabeth's hands shook constantly, her speech was sometimes slurred, and her memory appeared to fail. More alarmingly, he reported that her makeup took on a greenish tint, suggesting chemical reactions on her skin were visible even through the thick layers. These reports, circulating through European courts, undermined Elizabeth's diplomatic authority as foreign powers questioned her mental and physical capacity to rule. Her growing isolation was perhaps the most tragic aspect of this period. Once thriving on public adoration and diplomatic intrigue, Elizabeth became a recluse, emerging only for essential state functions in dimly lit rooms to conceal her cosmetic transformation. By the 1590s, for decades of lead poisoning had transformed Elizabeth from England's formidable monarch into a tragic figure whose grip on reality was slipping. Her hands, once praised for their elegance, trembled constantly, a classic sign of heavy metal toxicity mistaken by physicians as a nervous disposition. Her graceful walk became unsteady, requiring her to lean on furniture or courtiers for support. Her famous red hair fell out in patches, forcing reliance on elaborate wigs. Her mental state showed alarming deterioration. She forgot the names of longtime courtiers, became confused about basic government facts, and was once found talking to her reflection, believing it was her mother and Boleyn. Such episodes, carefully concealed, became more frequent. Elizabeth's behavior toward her courtiers grew erratic, even violent. She flew into rages over trivial matters, striking servants with whatever was at hand, followed by periods of deep melancholy where she refused to speak. The psychological effects of lead poisoning, depression, anxiety, and personality changes combined with aging to create an unpredictable ruler. The makeup routine, once her salvation, became daily torture. The application process, requiring her to remain motionless for hours, was physically agonizing as her body was racked with tremors and muscle pain. Beneath the layers of ceruse, her skin became discolored and lesioned, resembling parchment more than flesh. The toxic cosmetics had essentially mummified her face while she was still alive. In private moments, Elizabeth spoke of feeling poisoned by beauty and expressed regret for her choices. Yet, she felt trapped by the image she had created, unable to appear without the cosmetics that were killing her. The kingdom suffered from her decline. Important decisions were delayed for weeks as she struggled with confusion or remained locked in her chambers. Foreign policy became inconsistent, and the court, once a center of learning, became a place of whispered conversations and careful navigation around an unstable monarch. The winter of 1602 marked Elizabeth's final descent into the madness that characterized her last months. The accumulated effects of lead poisoning reached a critical threshold, producing symptoms no longer concealable. The Queen, once celebrated for her wit and cunning, struggled to maintain coherent conversations, often stopping mid-sentence, as if forgetting her thoughts. Courtiers watched in horror as the woman who defined an age disappeared before their eyes. Her obsession with death and the supernatural grew, with reports of seeing apparitions of her mother and half-sister, Mary Tudor. Hallucinations modern medicine recognizes as symptoms of severe lead poisoning. She spent hours talking to empty chairs, convinced she was conversing with these spectral figures. Elizabeth's physical condition became grotesque. Decades of lead-based cosmetics left her skin unable to heal, covered in weeping sores and lesions that even strong perfumes couldn't mask. Her hair turned white and fell out in clumps, and her teeth blackened and fell out due to mercury poisoning from her rouge. The makeup routine, now requiring entire days, involved layers so thick they resembled a death mask. Her ladies-in-waiting described a process where cosmetics cracked and fell away, necessitating constant reapplication. In lucid moments, Elizabeth understood her condition, speaking of being devoured by vanity and describing her face as a poison garden. These moments of clarity were followed by confusion and hallucinations, suggesting her brain was being systematically damaged by heavy metals. Her behavior grew dangerous. She was once found scraping makeup from her face with her fingernails, trying to remove what she called the poison mask, leaving wounds that required weeks to heal. Her final public appearance in November 1602 shocked observers. Propped up by elaborate clothing and cosmetics, she was barely recognizable as the Virgin Queen. Her speech was slurred, and she needed support to avoid falling. The woman who once commanded Europe's respect had become a tragic spectacle, a living reminder of the price of vanity. In her final weeks, Elizabeth became obsessed with writing a final testament, a secret document she worked on in the early morning hours when her mind was clearest. Attended only by her trusted lady-in-waiting, Catherine Carey, she struggled to write, her shaking hands barely able to hold a quill. The letter, discovered after her death, contained shocking revelations. In trembling handwriting, Elizabeth confessed to decades of deception and the slow suicide of vanity. She admitted knowing the dangers of her cosmetic routine but felt unable to abandon it without losing her authority. Most disturbingly, she hinted at manipulation by courtiers who encouraged her deadly beauty rituals, writing cryptically of those who would see me painted into my grave. She described periods of blackouts where she feared others ruled in her name and expressed regret for becoming a ghost haunting my own throne. The suppression of this letter by her successor, James I, speaks to its explosive contents, revealing that England's greatest queen had poisoned herself while possibly being manipulated would have undermined the mythology of her reign. The letter vanished into the royal archives, leaving only rumors of its contents. On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth drew her last breath in a chamber filled with mirrors reflecting shadows and cosmetic tools that could no longer disguise her decay. Unable to apply her makeup due to weakness, she relied on her ladies-in-waiting, though the result was more horrifying than human. Her death throes were marked by violent convulsions, cracking her makeup to reveal damaged skin beneath. She spoke to invisible figures, her wig slipping to reveal a scarred scalp. Her final coherent request was for a mirror, which her attendants, horrified by her appearance, refused to provide. Her last gesture was to touch her cheek, her fingers stained with ceruse. After her death, the removal of her cosmetics revealed skin barely resembling human flesh, her hair nearly gone, and her teeth black stumps. The undertakers noted the blue-gray discoloration of chronic lead poisoning. The discovery of her letter added a chilling dimension, suggesting a prolonged assassination through manipulation of her vanity. James I ordered the destruction of evidence related to her cosmetic routine, listing her death as natural causes. The myth of Gloriana was preserved, portraying her as England's greatest ruler, peacefully passing surrounded by loyal subjects. The suppression of Elizabeth's true story had lasting consequences. The dangers of lead-based cosmetics were known to some but not widely shared, leading other women to follow her deadly path. The myth of the ageless Virgin Queen, perpetuated through idealized portraits, obscured the reality of her deterioration. Her story reveals the impossible expectations faced by female rulers, forced to balance beauty and authority at the cost of their health. The hint of courtly manipulation raises questions about political assassination in the Tudor court, suggesting a subtle murder carried out over decades. Elizabeth's legacy is a cautionary tale of how historical narratives can be controlled. For centuries, her peaceful passing was accepted, while evidence of her poisoning remained hidden. Only recently have historians uncovered the truth, revealing a complex and tragic story. Her terrifying final days remind us that even the most powerful are vulnerable to societal pressures. The Virgin Queen, who survived every external threat, was destroyed by her own vanity, the demands of femininity, and possibly the betrayal of those she trusted. Her death marked the end of the Tudor dynasty and one of history's most prolonged self-destructions, carried out one cosmetic application at a time over 40 years. Let's honor Elizabeth's legacy by learning from her strength and her mistakes. Embrace your authentic self, and don't let societal expectations define your worth. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with others, and subscribe to Empress Secrets for more stories of powerful women who shaped history.